Welcome back. All right. So I want to talk about injuries, suspensions, all that fun stuff, because we're at that time of the year where it does get a lot of attention. I figure I might as well do a video on this and on the evolving discussion. I say evolving in those terms in that way because I don't know how much the conversation's really changed over the last 4+ years. But at any rate, normally when I do videos like this, I'll wear just the generic regular jersey, whether it's an all-star jersey that has NHL on the front or the custom hockey guy jersey. But in this case, I figured I haven't worn the Montreal jersey that has my name on it. So if you're wondering why it's a 13 and there's an A, it's because it's my number's 13 always, and A or a C is always on the front of jerseys because why not? You're paying for the jersey, you might as well get the A or the C on the front. That way, you can tell kids, you can go, look, I'm important. You guys have to listen to what I'm saying. And then when they don't listen, at least you tried. All right. So one thing that I want to discuss first is at this time of year, injury discussion, good luck. Lower body injury, upper body injury, they will often devolve into just undisclosed. And this is a conversation we've been having for a long time. And this is a conversation that may change. It may change because the vague injury descriptions don't work for everybody. Now, for us as fans, we'd like to have more information. I understand why we don't. I'm perfectly fine with the injuries being as vague as possible, and we'll get into why. But one entity that may not like it is, well, basically any gambling entity. They like to have an idea for who's going to be in the lineup and who's not for betting lines. The people betting want to know, is this guy going to play or is he not? And there was some belief that by now we would see full transparency with injuries, and we haven't. And I think it's because of the nature of the game. Hockey's a violent sport. It is very violent. And we talk a lot about the skill plays and the skill players, and people buy tickets to watch these skill players. You're going to buy a ticket to watch Connor McDavid. You're going to buy to watch Alex Ovechkin, Sidney Crosby, and soon we'll be paying to watch Connor Bedard. And the tickets for those teams when they come into town, usually, and I know from a Vancouver perspective, the ticket prices are higher when A, it's a rival, or B, it's a megastar coming into town. So the reality is that we're in a league that we value the skill, but the violence is still there. So you may not pay for the violence, but you may not want your money back after you see the violence either. Most hockey fans understand that there's an inherent risk in playing the game. But where things get interesting to me is when I see intent to injure. And I'll see this a lot, Well, that hit should have been a suspension because you can see there is intent. Intent is tough to argue. It's very, very tough to argue intent because you're stating, I know what that player was thinking in that play. And I know and we're not worried about anything else that happened around that play, what else might have been said or have happened before that. It's basically, it's intent to injure. And the thing is, intent to injure is this interesting thing. It's not the violence of the hit, I think, that necessarily negates whether or not there's intent. Because here's the thing. So a really violent hit, clearly intent to injure. But there's also the other side of it. So in game one between Edmonton and Vegas, there was a lot of discussion about how many cross-checks Mark Stone took to the back. We know he has a bad back. We know he's had 2 back surgeries, that it's kept him out of hockey for a long period of time twice. So what the Oilers are doing, whether it's targeting of Stone or not, this may just be simple defending. In front of the net, you get your stick, and you got to push the guy out from front of the net. You have to clear that front of the net so your goalie can see that this is just hockey 101, really. And so you have players out there who are going to cross-check Stone in the back, but because we know Stone has a bad back, that's going to be seen as intent to injure. So the exact same cross-check being thrown on, say, Marchessault or being thrown on Riley Smith, we might overlook. But when it's Stone, we say, well, that's clearly intent to injure. And that's why we don't hear about what the injuries are. That's why they don't tell us until the season is over. Till the season is completely over. There's no playoffs. We're out of the playoffs. Okay, this guy had broken ribs. This guy had a separated shoulder. This guy here, he was playing on a cracked bone in his foot. Like, they will tell us all this after, not before, because they know that players will target. And I'm old enough to remember when injuries weren't vague and they were telling us what the injuries were. Guy come into the game. You knew he had cracked ribs. All of a sudden you're noticing there's some cross checks being thrown to the guy's ribs. Bad ankle. Be a shame if somebody tripped him. You take a 2-minute penalty, but you might knock him out. You might take him completely out of the game. And players did this. And so when the intent to injure comes out, I don't weigh in on it because, like I said, intent is really hard to prove. Ask anybody in a court of law. It's hard to prove intent. You can prove with the result. But and I'll come down to this here, the injury equaling suspension debate, I don't like that debate for a simple reason. Let's just say I'm out on the ice. I throw 2 different cross checks. Physically, it's the exact same cross check. One cross check, the guy jumps up, he skates away. The other cross check, the guy's down, he's in a heap, and he has to be helped off by medical professionals, right? Now, should there be a suspension for one and not the other? No. And I say that because it should be based on that cross check. So if that cross check that I threw is dangerous and viewed as a little bit too violent for the violent hockey, then it should be the same punishment for both. So when I see, well, this player should be suspended until that player is healthy enough to return, so that's just such a vague terminology. And not only that, but if you really want to play devil's advocate, let's just say Rangers and the Islanders. Chris Kreider goes out and he throws a hit on Matt Martin. Just using that as an example. And so the Islanders are in a position, let's just say they're fighting the Rangers for a playoff spot. And Martin's hurt. They're like, Martin's hurt. He's injured. Kreider's suspension is going to be as long as Martin's out. Oh, really? This Martin injury could be a lot worse than we thought. He might be out for the rest of the season. I don't know. And then you don't have Kreider for the rest of the season, right? There's that potential where you might say, yeah, well, we could just hurt them. And in the playoffs, you could do the same thing. Oh, man, he's suspended for as long as our guy's injured. You know, that's really weird. He's injured for the rest of the series. However many games it is, that's how many games he's going to be injured. So that's too bad. And there are ways the league could police this, but you're taking one issue and you're creating a whole bunch of other new issues. And then there's going to be a lot of, well, this guy's not really hurt. He's faking it just to try to get a suspension. They're holding him out and they're playing 11-7 rather than 12-6. That forward's not really hurt, but they want to make sure that they get the suspension, so they're keeping him out. So it is a fine line. And again, I could throw a hit along the boards that's perfectly clean and injure a guy for the rest of the year. That does happen. Guys throw clean hits, but because it's a violent hit and because the boards have no give, the boards are just awful to crash into, there could be a suspension. Should I be out for the rest of the year throwing a clean hit because I injured a guy? And if your answer to that is yes, you might be upset about which players do or don't get suspended under that circumstance. The one thing, too, that I've always thought when it comes to suspensions and why I don't argue as much for suspensions as I used to is I don't know that a 1 or 2 game suspension necessarily changes behavior. I don't know that players who throw that hit get suspended for 1 game if they come out of that suspension saying, I have to play different. Very often we will see players saying the opposite, saying, yeah, I got suspended, but this is my game. I have to play this way. If the injuries / suspensions, if we don't see a change in player behavior, I think we have to kind of revisit Department of Player Safety. And I've talked about having some standardized setup, but I don't think an injury can be part of that standardized setup because the exact same hit in 2 different scenarios could result in a completely different outcome. And I know there are people who are upset about head hits, and we need to get head hits out of the game. And I'm fine with getting head hits out of the game, but I'm going to go back to May 1st of 2019. So this is a little over 4 years ago, where Gary Bettman sat down with the House of Commons when apparently the House of Commons was very upset about hits and head hits in hockey. I haven't heard anything about that from them lately. But at any rate, that was the news of the day that day. And he went to the House of Commons and said banning all head contact would ultimately mean there would be no more body checking. And he brought up how players of a different height You're of different heights. You're going to hit a guy in the head if he's smaller than you. It can happen. And being of a smaller stature myself, it absolutely can. There have been times where just me playing street hockey, floor hockey, I might get an elbow in the face. There was a time I got a high stick and had to go to the hospital for stitches. And I think that me being of a shorter stature was probably the reason for injuries in that case, right? So it does happen, right? And that's head contact, right? I got a high stick right above the eye, so and no, I wasn't wearing a visor. I wasn't even wearing a helmet for that floor hockey game. So, because generally I don't. I tried. The next week I tried. I was like, I'll try a helmet, and I had the cage, and I was like, this doesn't work, and I took it off. So, I know I talk about NHL players, but I get it. I get why they don't want to, get the fish bowls going on and everything. But there's a big difference between what I was dealing with and what National Hockey League players deal with. No 90-mile-an-hour slap shots when I played. But I don't think Bettman's wrong. And the funny thing is, I think it was Lindros that came out and basically said that for safety's sake, the NHL should visit body checking and how much, how important that is and how dangerous it is and try to weigh it out. There's no actual desire from anybody around hockey to see body checking gone. I can't see it. I can't see a league without body checking. I understand the thought process. Because one thing that Bettman has said that isn't completely untrue is, well, it's not all head contact that causes CTE via concussions. True. You can, and I've said this recently as well, you can get a concussion without any actual head contact. Absolutely, it's possible. The violence of a hit, whiplash, you can end up with concussion symptoms along with whiplash without any kind of a head contact. But I also think that the NHL could do more to curb head contact than what it does. I do think that there are times where players are in vulnerable positions that a player doesn't have to throw the big hit, but then you get into intent. So you get it, and this is, the Trouba hit, right? A few days ago. Trouba throws a big open ice hit on Meier. Meier's a game time decision tonight for the Devils. He may not play for a while, right? But it's deemed a clean hit. It's deemed a clean hit because of where the puck is at the time, when Trouba sets up the hit, and the fact that Meier's leaning forward means, there's head contact, but it's because of the positioning for Meier. And so again, if Trouba throws that hit, and if Meier's straight up, odds are Meier doesn't leave the game. Meier probably played game one, and he's probably playing tonight. So then, is the hit the problem, or is it on the recipient's end where they have to be careful, and the terminology is always keep your head up. So that's the eternal debate in the NHL, is that if I can throw that hit 99 times out of 100, and that 100th time it's a guy leaning forward and he's in an awkward position, suddenly I can't throw that hit. Should that hit be illegal? And then you're coming back to the intent argument. Well, clearly in this case, he intended to hurt Timo Meier. And yet we have no way of proving that intent. And it makes it really difficult when you're dealing with the NHLPA. You can't just say, well, this was a clean hit, but you can see there's intent to hurt the player, so we're going to suspend him. And again, Bettman himself, having said, and he's never said anything against this, he's never gone back on this, you can't get head contact out of the game. You can't. Because if you do, you're going to have to take all the contact out of the game. Because there's always a chance you're going to strike somebody in the head. And there is always that chance. Now, the interesting side of this too is that this is a league that still allows fighting, and I've seen people say, well, they don't because it's a 5-minute penalty. Yeah, but it's not a game misconduct. So I've seen the argument making it a game misconduct. The Quebec League, of course, doing that, and the Quebec League trying to, go as far as they can to make sure they still get government funding and all that. But fighting and scrums are part of hockey. It really is. And the NHL has no desire to get rid of fighting. I think fighting being down, they're probably okay with that, but I don't think there's any hope that they're going to get rid of fighting. And I say any hope as to anybody who wants to see fighting gone. I don't. But to say that fighting hasn't led to long-term health consequences for some of those fighters would be incorrect as well. Some of the guys who were best known for their pugilistic tendencies and for being able to go out there and box with the best of them are no longer with us. And in part because of the violence of the game that they played. Now, how much the NHL is responsible for that, of course, we'll never really know because they settled out of court. They settled out of court. They never acknowledged there was any connection between concussions slash CTE and playing in the National Hockey League, because there's a whole bunch of money that would go out the door immediately if they admitted, well, yeah, actually, there's a connection. Yep, because there's liability. Then they're introducing liability, and not only that, you could then look back all the way to, say, like the 80s, when I was watching hockey and we started talking about concussions, and say, well, the NHL knew back then. So any player who was concussed in the NHL from 1980, let's say 1986 till now, could technically go after the league. So they can't. They can't come out and admit that. They also can't come out and try to ban head contact, which would ban body checking, because then they'd also have to look at fighting, and you would lose some fans along the way. Because there's the two sides of the argument. So they allow fighting, which makes them different than every other professional league in North America. Outside of fighting and wrestling, you really, and even in wrestling, and I'm talking amateur wrestling, you can't throw a punch. Like, you can't get in the, and then just look at that. I didn't even have to flip my, he's out because I punched him in the head. You can't do that in amateur wrestling. You're out. This is why amateur wrestlers are pro wrestlers. Doesn't necessarily mean that if you're good at one, you can be good at the other. But yeah, the whole scrums, the fighting, that's just part of the game. Because you have to have that there. It's in the culture of the game. You can't really get that out. You can try it at a level with the younger kids, of course, and I'm okay with that. But there's a skill to fighting. There's guys who go out there and fight, and you're like, oh man, he's going to get lit up. He does not know what he's doing. And it's terrifying when you see a guy drop the gloves for a fight, and he clearly doesn't know how to fight. Because then he's not defending himself. He's going to get clocked. He's probably going to take a shot to the jaw. He's going to be out before he hits the ice. This is part of the reason why the NHL, I think, is very keen on goaltenders not fighting. Because we've seen goalies get hurt in fights too. And part of it is because they're not really known for being, the fighters. Some of them can fight. I've seen some goaltenders who are quite good fighters. Sean Burke comes to mind immediately as a goalie that you just didn't. If you were thinking about running the crease with Sean Burke, you just decided not to. Billy Smith, another one. Better off not to do it, rather than even thinking about it. Billy'd come out of the net and clobber you with his stick. And because it's a violent game. It's less violent than it was. There's less violence in the game now than it was in the 90s and the early 2000s. And I've talked about how, because it's less violent, the incidents we see that you might want to talk about from last night or the night before, those incidents stand out because we're no longer in a league where there's so many violent hits and so many violent plays. It is a league that I think has weeded out a lot of the players who might be more likely to commit a hit or a foul that would lead to a 20-plus game suspension. I don't think there's a lot of players in the league right now who are on that same level of hateability, if that's a terminology that I can use. But it is a debate that we're going to have for a long time. And I don't think that the injuries being related to the suspensions will ever happen. It's possible something changes. Department of Player Safety, I really think does need some sort of a revamp. I don't think the whole thing needs to be torn apart, but there does need to be something done. But intent. Really, really hard to prove that. And that's why I don't get into it. That's why I try to avoid a lot of the more controversial plays in the game, because I know that it's going to distract from everything else that happened in the game. And so, yeah, that's why I don't get into those nearly as much as others might, because I don't see that it helps. And a lot of the time, nothing happens. There were times early in this channel's existence where I was like, well, that's got to be a suspension, right? Nope. Is that a suspension? Nope. So eventually I just said, you know what? There's really not much point in me talking about it until we know what Department of Player Safety is going to do, because usually there's not much done. And maybe it's because, well, we'd have to prove intent for this to be a suspension. And again, so the question I ask is simple. If I throw the same hit 100 times, but 3 of those times there's an injury that results, should that be a suspendable offense? Or do you look at the other 97 and say, that's fine? And should there be some kind of a setup where if I'm throwing the hit, then I have to take into consideration the positioning of the player that I'm hitting, rather than saying, well, they've put themselves in a vulnerable position. I could just smoke them right now. Because that's where we're at. And again, these players don't go out on the ice and all high-five each other after the game and, oh, hey, great game, guys, cool. Can't wait to play you next time. They generally don't like each other. And that's something we like as fans. When you generally can't stand the players you're playing against, you're far more likely to hit a little bit harder. You're far more likely to probably cause an injury as a result. But let me know your thoughts in the comment section below, as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.